Content for SIMA, and I'm excited to welcome Rob Edwards and Adam Hansen from Boss, who are here to share tips on prepping your equipment so you're ready for that first winter event. If you have any questions, please drop them in the chat box on the bottom right of the Boot Camp Live webpage. That's your Boot Camp headquarters page, or via YouTube if you're watching the live stream on YouTube. We're going to hold questions until the end. So please just keep sending them there and we'll get to them at the end. And I'm ready to welcome Rob and Adam. Take it away, guys.
Hey, good morning, everybody, or possibly good afternoon, depending on where you're actually joining us from. Like Cheryl said, my name is Adam Hansen. I'm a regional sales manager with Boss Snowplow, and also with me is Rob Edwards from Boss Snowplow. Rob, up until
Morning.
recently, was in the tech service department at Boss. So if you had called in, there was a good chance you probably chatted with him. But recently, he's moved over to working in our e-commerce, dealing with our website and things of that nature. So again, I'm going to go through each presentation, each slide here. So we're going to talk about truck plows, spreaders, liquid de-icing equipment, box plows and pushers, sidewalk machines. So I'm going to go through each one, kind of touch on some bullet points, and then after I'm done with each slide, Rob is going to chime in, with some experience that he's had working in tech service, kind of talking about things like that. So without further ado, we will get started here with the first slide. So it's very important before the season starts when you're dealing with your truck plows. So when you have it in storage, once you pull it out, the first thing you want to do is inspect the plow for any cracked welds or any breakages or anything like that. This is something that could have occurred at some point, during the season. And, a lot of times it's covered with snow and ice. You may not actually see that. So it's something you kind of want to go over everything with a fine tooth comb and make sure, there's no breaks or cracked welds, get that taken care of before the season starts. The other thing too you want to check is the torque of all fasteners, pins, retainers, nuts, and bolts. So again, this is something too that could have occurred during last season. Maybe it's in an area you really don't check. Maybe it's underneath something. So this is a good opportunity, when it's not cold out, you're not laying in the snow in a parking lot, just check that over when you have the opportunity. Another important thing, wherever that plow is sitting for storage, look on the ground for any leaks that might have occurred. So you also want to inspect all hydraulic hoses and lines as well, just to make sure there's nothing broken, split open, or if there's any spots where it might have been rubbing on something where it's going to wear through. So a lot of times where it's sitting in storage, you may see a sign, maybe a little, pool of hydraulic fluid on the ground. Determine where that came from and follow that and figure out what you need to do to fix that. The next thing to do is check your cutting edges and plow shoes for any excessive wear. Before the season, you may have some life left in your cutting edge and you may not want to replace it right away because maybe I have 5 or 6 storms that I could get through with that edge. That's fine, but at least this way maybe you can go to your local dealer, get the cutting edges you need, so when the opportunity arises, when those are completely worn out, that you can swap them out, because the last thing you want to find out with your cutting edges is that they're worn out and it's 3 a.m. and maybe your dealer doesn't offer 24-hour parts and service. So just make sure you have that before the season starts. The next thing would be check the tightness of the trip or blade return springs. This is something too that over time, as those springs maybe start to wear out or some of that hardware loosens up, it's something you want to check regularly, but also make sure you check before the season. And a big thing here, different manufacturers may have different guidelines for this, so just make sure you look at the user's manual for that proper procedure. Another thing too, especially at this time of year, clean, prep, and paint any areas that might be scratched, chipped, or rusted. It's a good time to do that now because it's going to be a little bit warmer, especially if you don't have a heated shop to work in. Just take care of that before any corrosion takes over and causes more damage throughout the season. Lubricating attachment points. I know this is also very important, in particular with like Boss snowplows. Um, with our hitch system, a lot of times if you just leave those pins unlubricated, they'll tend to be sticky and may not actually want to spring into place once you raise the tower. So it's really important to get those lubricated. Greasing the vertical bushings on V plows. This is something that a lot of times is overlooked. It's very important to do to keep that area well lubricated with grease so it's working properly and also extends the life of those bushings as well. A really, really important thing to look into is cleaning and inspecting all electrical connections. So a lot of times what I recommend is using like an electrical contact cleaner. And then once you do that, apply a dielectric grease or even a product like fluid film or maybe like a Crown anti-corrosive spray. Corrosion seems to be the number one enemy with anything in snow equipment and especially in electrical connections. So I can kind of speak from my own experience running plows for many years. Every time I would unhook them, I would make sure, my electrical connections, I'd make sure that I clean those connectors, hit it with a little bit of fluid film, and make sure that the dust cap and everything is properly installed on there to keep any moisture away. Because as long as you do that, it's really going to extend the life of your harness and avoid any issues when you're going to hook it up, the night before or even the morning of a snow event. So the next thing you want to do once you go through everything we're talking about in the previous bullet points, actually attach the plow to the vehicle it's going to be on and run through all the functions of the plow. So that's one thing. I know in a fleet, you may have a mechanic, like for example, if you're running Boss snowplows, you may have a mechanic that has a truck, with a Boss mount and they hook up every plow to make sure it works. That's great for plow functions. But the other thing is you want to make sure you can get that plow on the truck it's going on to make sure everything on the truck side is also working properly. So that's something that is sometimes overlooked. And then once you have it hooked up to the truck itself, check all your lights, your high beams, your low beams, your turn signals, your hazards, things like that. And then also something that does get overlooked is realigning the plow headlights. So every manufacturer has guides in their manuals on how to do this. But I know personally I've hooked up to plows before and I did not realign the plow headlights and maybe it got bumped while in storage. And then I have one headlight shining way up and I have one headlight shining way down. And it just makes for that first night of plowing a little more difficult than it should be. So that's something you want to make sure that you also do. So that kind of concludes all the bullet points we have on truck plows. So now I'm going to turn it over to Rob and he can kind of comment on some of these things as well.
So with a lot of these things to look for, a lot of them are very quick, easy things you can do. And a lot of guys leave them doing post-season before they put their equipment away. Pre-season is also a good time to check and make sure none of this got overlooked. Big one that we've seen in tech is hydraulic leaks. Most leaks are not caused by something that, say, just happened. It's over time. You get hydraulic hoses where the coating on them or the rubber on the outside starts to degrade. You get a nick. Even in storage, someone might have bumped the plow and the wing bumped up against the coupler and it put a little kink or a little crimp in the hose. Those are good things to look for. Replacing the fluid is something I would recommend doing every year, whether you do it at the end of the year or preseason before you take your equipment out. On our plows, it's straightforward, simple process. Shouldn't take you more than 20 minutes, a half hour to change the fluid out. And as long as everything stays nice, you're good for the year. And it saves a lot of headaches down the road, not having any water that accumulated through condensation and storage during the summer there. It is just a helpful step on having everything ready to go when the snow flies. Same thing with checking tightness on your trip springs as well as your blade wing return springs. Easy way to do it is just take a business card, check with the wings brought into the vehicle or the plow sitting level on the ground. Just check those springs. You should be able to slide a business card between the coils on the springs and just feel a little bit of resistance as you slide it through. That's the proper amount of tension on the springs where they're not over tightened, where you're going to start stretching them, but they're not loose enough. They're going to bounce around when everything's returned to like a home position. Lubricating the attachment points is a good one, as well as the bushings on the vertical hinge pin. On all of our equipment, we have a hole drilled in those bushings where you can just take a needle fitting on a grease gun, just grease them up really quick. And even that's something too you should do intermittently through the season, but it's a great thing as you're just doing your inspection, checking your plow function. Put 1-2 pumps of grease in every one of them and run the wings all the way out and back in just to distribute that grease around the pin. With all the electrical connections, when we say apply dielectric grease to them, don't overdo it. Dielectric grease is meant to be applied in just a thin film. If you start to just pack these connectors full of dielectric grease, you'll run into more issues where it'll actually cause the pins to hydrolock between the male and female pins, and it won't allow you to seat the connector fully. A lot of guys have gone to fluid film with this, where it's a lot thinner and it almost makes a better film itself. Then with attaching the plow to the vehicle, that is also a good one, like Adam said, to attach the plow to the vehicle it's going on. You can take one truck and test all of them. That more so just test plow function, but a lot of these trucks throughout the year, whether they were in an accident, had work done at a dealer somewhere out of your shop, a lot of the dealers or those techs will see plow wiring, connectors, anything like that, and they'll just bypass around it and hook the truck up factory because they don't want to deal with the plow wiring at all. We see this especially with body shops. Big thing just to check and make sure it is still functioning properly on the truck itself. And that's really what I have for the big hit points on truck plows. But this is a lot of the bigger things we see in tech service when guys go to try and hook their plow up at the beginning of the year and they start having issues or trouble.
Excellent. Thanks for adding that, Rob. Now we're going to move over to spreaders. So a few things you want to look into once you get your spreader out of storage. The first thing is follow manufacturer's guidelines for securement to truck beds. I know Rob will probably talk about this here at the end, but there are specific ways to secure your spreaders. I know you can look at the manuals, but one good way to do it, an easy way to do it, when you actually have it installed at a dealer, they know what they're doing. Take pictures of how it is secured to the bed. So the next year you can just follow that as a guideline. So very important to do that. You also want to inspect the mounting hardware. Make sure the straps are frayed and are in good working order. Same thing, they're in a truck bed, you might be throwing shovels in and out, spreaders, bags of salt. Something might, create a very small cut on one of the straps, and that's going to start to fray it. And obviously that's going to compromise the strap. So you want to, check that. You also want to inspect welds at any attachment points, from the spreader or on the truck bed itself. Make sure you look for any cracks, breaks, or any excessive corrosion, and make sure you get that fixed. The other thing, you want to inspect harness and plugs for any corrosion or damage, especially on a spreader. We're spreading salt that's a corrosive material, especially plugs that maybe aren't, capped properly during storage, or maybe just during use in winter if you take the spreader out. This is going to cause issues. So make sure you inspect those plugs, clean them, and properly hit them with dielectric grease or fluid film, something like that. So using the electrical contact cleaner is a really good way to do this first before you put on any of that product. Next thing is grease all bearings. Again, look at your user manual. It'll tell you all the grease points on your spreaders itself. Very, very important to do this. So make sure you get that grease properly. On pintle chain spreaders, I know augers are becoming more popular, but there's still plenty of people that run the pintle chain. So you want to make sure you grease the chain and adjust if necessary according to your user manual. So that's going to help with the longevity, of your pintle chain, because that's not necessarily something you want to have to replace during the middle of the season. So check and inspect that as properly as as possible. So next thing, for spreaders that have a vibrator on them, you want to inspect the hopper around for any cracks. I know over the years, like just stopping at different snow companies, I will see, even a stainless steel spreader where they actually had to reinforce the side of the hopper around the vibrator, just because, again, the nature of what that vibrator does. So you want to inspect that area really well, for any issues like that. Same thing like with the plows on the trucks. Plug it in, run through all the functions of the spreader. Make sure your auger or your pintle chain operates properly, your spinner motor, everything like that, any lights that might be on there. Just make sure, again, you can check it on, if your mechanic is checking on one truck, that's great, but it should also be checked on the truck that it is going on. That's really important to do. And then for anyone that still has a gas engine spreader, servicing the engine is also really important. This is something that you should have done after the season. You don't really want to leave those engines sit with any sort of corrosive material or anything on them. But make sure you service it again and make sure everything is good to go before the season actually starts. So, Rob, anything to add there?
With strapping down the spreaders, big thing with that is, like Adam said, take pictures of how the dealer set it up. They'll have everything set up for the straps properly, so it's not applying an unabnormal or an odd pressure onto the spreader. We have seen guys where they'll cross the straps, run them the wrong direction, and then just crank them down hard, and it'll start to distort and warp the hoppers on the spreaders, where that's an easy thing to do. Set it up the way the dealers had it, tie it down just like that, and then with your straps, just a normal amount of pressure on the straps. These things don't need to be just cranked down where you have a pipe on the handle of the strap trying to get it tighter. That'll start to crack things. The electrical connectors, same thing. I would even recommend as you go through the season to clean those up. Connectors, it's a harsh environment being around a salt spreader, especially on the back where all the connectors are on the back end of the truck. Keep them clean, keep them greased, and you shouldn't have any issues with them. Another good point on changing fluids as well as for gas engine spreaders, servicing the engine, check the gearboxes on the drive systems as well. Those all should have some type of gear oil in them. I know ours run 75 W90 synthetic gear oil with a limited slip modifier in them, so they work better at cold temperatures, or the fluid moves better at cold temperatures. That's a quick, easy thing to do in your preseason maintenance. Just change the fluid out.
Okay, perfect. All right, now the next thing we're going to step into is liquid de-icing equipment. So obviously people are probably more familiar with spreaders than they are liquid de-icing equipment, but liquids are starting to gain momentum, and there's some certain points you want to inspect, and a lot of it's going to be similar to a spreader. So the first thing is you want to inspect all mounting points and hardware for damage. So a lot of times with the liquid de-icing equipment, you have a skid with a tank on top of it. So the mounting is going to be a little bit different than it would be for a spreader. But again, you just want to make sure you check that over and avoid any issues. I know I've talked to people that actually had hardware that broke and a sprayer fell off of a flatbed of a truck and caused a severe amount of damage. Luckily, no one was hurt. It didn't hit any other cars, but caused a lot of damage to the sprayer itself. It's something that could have been avoided had they just inspected that prior to the season. So inspect all electrical connection points for corrosion or damage. Same thing, electrical contact cleaner and dielectric grease or fluid film. A lot of times on de-icing sprayers, they're going to have more electrical connections because you have, things like hose reels, hose reel motors. You're going to have flow meters, proportional valves, boom section valves, things like that. So generally there's more connectors you're going to have to take care of and make sure they're, properly cleaned and have the proper contact and everything like that. You want to do that. Next thing is you want to verify that the pump will move freely and is not seized. Usually this problem occurs when people, at the end of the season, like in March, they go out one time and then the next week it gets warm and they're writing the spring work and they just forget to rinse out their sprayer. So what I recommend doing, to keep that pump free and keep it from seizing up, run multiple tanks of fresh water through the entire sprayer, the boom, the hose reel, everything like that. And then also run like a salt neutralizer through it. Again, trying to take any of that salt that's kind of grabbing onto the insides of any of those poly or stainless parts and getting it out of the system. So a lot of times people that fail to do that, once they go to start their sprayer in fall, whether it be a gas engine or an electric, that pump will be seized up. So again, it's very important that you clean that out the previous season. Since you're using, liquids here, you want to inspect all hoses and hose connections for any damage or leaks. It's something that can occur maybe at the end of the season or when it was sitting in storage. Something happened, maybe another piece of equipment was, backed into something. This is where you want to look into that. You also want to check the hose reel motor, the hose, and the spray gun. So Something I've seen on de-icing sprayers, especially ones that are not all stainless steel, especially if they are gear driven, a lot of times when you go in fall to actually try to retract that hose reel, it's not going to move because a lot of times that gear is actually seized to the hose reel assembly itself. So a lot of times you just want to keep that lubricated. It's something good to do before the season starts and throughout the season. So just lubricate around the entire assembly, whether it's chain drive or gear driven. So that's very important. So gas engine sprayers, again, just like a spreader, you want to keep that engine serviced. You want to make sure it's good to go for the season. And you also want to lubricate, all throttle and choke linkages to keep them moving freely. Also, what I've seen on de-icing sprayers with gas engines, especially around the starter area, it's not a bad idea to, coat that area in like a anti-corrosive battery terminal spray, just because basically where it's going to be mounted on the sprayer, a lot of times it can get more road spray on it than you'd care to have. So any sort of protection you can add to it, it's just going to add to the longevity of that sprayer. Since these liquid de-icing sprayers have tanks, you could develop cracks over time. A lot of these tanks, they're meant to flex and to move, but in certain situations, if they do get hit by something, you can develop a small crack, or if they are stored outdoors, the sun can cause damage to that. And, you might be using that sprayer every single year for many years, but maybe 8 or 9 years later, it starts to develop some cracks from sitting outside. UV rays can be harmful to tanks, so make sure you check that. Something else that gets overlooked is the actual tank straps that are holding the tank to the skid. So whether you have like a nylon strap or if you have maybe some steel straps, check the hardware that's holding that on. Check the tension of the straps. And a lot of times what I recommend doing is having that tank full when you check the tightness of that, because those tanks will flex and contract with liquid in them, and then once they're sprayed out too. So that's something you want to keep in mind. The other thing too, make sure your filter is cleaned, make sure your flow meter is clean, and your proportional valve is clean. Again, with a flow meter, sometimes if you have salt that sits inside there, it can affect the reading, especially if you're using a magnetic flow meter. If you have salt buildup on the sensor eyes, the signal is not going to pass through them properly. So you just want to make sure those are clean. And also proportional valve. This kind of goes back to when I said running fresh water through the system to clean it out. I've talked to people that have used like basically a very thick beet juice type material. And what happened is they did not properly clean out their sprayer. And that material is so sticky that the little motor on the proportional valve was not able to actually move. So they had to pull the entire valve body off, soak it in a 5-gallon pail with like Dawn dish soap, and then work it back and forth to free it up. So it's very important to make sure that's clean and moving properly. And then the last thing would just be inspecting nozzles. Make sure any of them are not damaged or plugged up with any salt or any other debris. Again, that's something that's sometimes overlooked. When you're cleaning it up in spring, you may have the boom off of the truck because you were pulling a trailer with it and you don't get the opportunity to run water through it to clean it out. Make sure you do that. So make sure nothing is plugged up. So the first time you get to, parking lot on that first storm and you turn it on, all those nozzles are flowing freely. So that kind of touches on all the liquid de-icing equipment portion. Rob, you got anything to add there?
I would say biggest thing to add with this is just take the equipment, fill the tank up with water, check for any kind of fittings that may be starting to leak a little bit, weep that might just need a simple tighten up. Run your proportional valves, your sectional valves, make sure everything moves freely and nice and smooth. You'll notice after running a little bit through it, running them back and forth, if anything's going to develop a little bit of a hang up as things kind of get rehydrated again, or as anything that might be clumped up, like a little bit of dried out salt comes through the system and might start to plug anything up, you're going to notice it right away. Same thing with the engine, run it up, run it back down. Just make sure everything operates smooth and everything's running well with it and flowing well.
Yeah, and that's the nice part with liquid de-icing equipment compared to spreaders. You can just put water in this in August and drive around and make sure all the functions are working. It's a little more difficult to, do a test run with salt in August. So that's one advantage you have with liquid de-icing equipment. It's easy to test it, in the off season. So next we're going to talk about our box plows and pushers. So again, very similar to truck plows where you want to check the torque of all fasteners, pins, retainers, nuts, and bolts. The other thing too, you want to inspect the attachment plate for any damage and verify that it hooks up properly, to say the skid loader or compact wheel loader. I know sometimes these attachment plates can, get some corrosion and things like that, where maybe the pins won't actually, engage and lock in place. So just make sure you hook it up to a machine and verify that it works. So for box plows, they're using attachment forks and chains. So basically, if it's like a bucket mount pusher, you're going to have to use chains and binders to actually, secure it to the bucket. This is something too, you want to inspect every link of the chain to make sure there aren't any wear points or anything in that chain that would be, basically a weak point where it could break. Make sure your binders are well lubricated with no corrosion, so they're moving freely and you can get them tightened properly when that time comes. And you want to replace them if needed. A section of chain, if you do have a weak link here or there, it's better to just replace that chain so you don't have problems during the season. So the other thing too with box plows and pushers, making sure you have like a ratchet binder to hook these up. You don't want to use like a lever binder for this. So that's why you want to make sure that ratchet binders are working so you don't, in a pinch, use a lever binder. So very important. For box plows that use a slip hitch design, so you want to make sure you grease and lubricate that area and verify that it moves freely, because that's the last thing you want to do is get to a lot and basically your slip hitch is kind of stuck in one spot and you can't properly use it. So very important. Inspect the cutting edges and shoes for wear. Now just note sometimes on pushers, since you have the shoes on the outside and the cutting edge in the center, they may not wear evenly. So you may have a center cutting edge that looks totally fine, but your shoes are almost worn through. And that could be a situation where the operator is running it tilted forward, or maybe your cutting edge is a little bit more worn because it's tilted back. So a lot of that depends on how the operator was using it. So inspect both of those things for wear. And again, have those parts on hand, because sometimes your dealer may not have the specific shoe or cutting edge because there's more truck plows out there than box plows. So usually truck plows, availability of parts, it's much easier to get them. So box plows, depending where you're getting them from, they may have to order that in. So, keep that in mind when you're doing your preseason inspection. For rubber edge pushers, the edge should be adjusted to hang basically only 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch below the shoes for the best scrape. A lot of times too, we recommend going to whatever manufacturer that push box, because they'll have certain guidelines on this. But that's kind of a general rule of thumb, that rubber edge should be hanging 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch below the shoes, so you get the best scrape. On pushers with trip mechanisms, you want to inspect, any springs, any rubber blocks or anything like that for damage, and make sure, you may have some of those extra on hand before the season starts. So if something breaks during a storm, especially if you're running something like a 16-foot pusher, that's probably going to be a very high production machine for you. You would hate for that to be down just because of something as simple as some broken blocks or springs. So make sure you have the right parts on the shelf. And just like any of the plows or anything, for chips, scratches, or rust, this is a good time to clean, prep, and paint those areas to stop any corrosion that will continue throughout the winter season. So, Rob, anything to add there?
Big thing you'd hit on was the chain binders. Make sure your ratcheting chain binders are moving freely. One good thing is to have a section of chain as well as a binder in the machine with you, just extra. We have had guys say they go down or have those go down, and that does affect a lot of what they're running or how easily they can keep progressing through their night. Another big hit is we see it a lot more on the skid steer style pushers that use a slip hitch. A lot of those boxes do have shims and wear plates in them designed to be a wearable item. Check those out, make sure they're not too worn down, or replace them as you need preseason. That way you don't have to keep going through or be working on equipment out in the field when it's cold, frozen, and just not friendly to work on. It will help keep those hitches as well as the way they're set up to make the box float or slip work a lot better. You'll get a lot less slop out of the plow itself or out of the pusher itself.
Okay. So next thing we're going to talk about here are sidewalk machines. So sidewalk machines can vary anything from, if you're looking at like a John Deere 1025R with a cab and a snowblower, all the way to maybe a Ventrac SSV, a Boss Snow Raider, or a Boss SR Mag. So a lot of this, it's very universal, throughout all those. So when you're looking at, something like a plow, you might focus on the plow itself, but this is going to be the entire machine. So same thing, if you use these machines, just for winter purposes, make sure you inspect the machine where it was sitting for any leaks. Just look over everything with a fine tooth comb for any damage. And then at this point, you want to complete any recommended maintenance from the manufacturer. Something else that kind of gets overlooked, verify all the functions of the machine are in good working order. And this is not just, does the machine start? Does it drive? Does the attachment, does, say like a broom, does the broom, go side to side? Do the bristles move forward and reverse like they're supposed to? You want to look at, make sure the doors are sealing up properly if you have a cab. Make sure the door handles are in good working order, that all the lights work, that the wipers, the heaters, any fans you may have in there, make sure everything like that is working properly. You also want to inspect the tires for any wear and check tire pressure. Verify that there's no leaks or anything like that, because I know personally for me, being around sidewalk equipment, we've pulled out the equipment, gone through everything, and then the night before a storm, we noticed that one of the tires was pretty much flat because we never really checked the air pressure, and maybe there was a slow leak. Whether that have been something from damage on the rim or maybe something that punctured the tire, it's just something you want to make sure it's in good working order, and also make sure the tires have the proper tread on them. Sometimes too, you use these things year after year and those tires slowly wear out. Maybe you need to put a new set of tires on it, and that's going to give it basically a whole new lease on life. It might make it push completely differently than you remember. So keep that in mind. You want to hook up to all the different attachments you have. Make sure you run through all the functions of the attachments. For example, like our SR Mag, we have straight blades, we have V blade, we have a broom, we have a blower. So whatever attachments you have, make sure you hook up to the machine. Make sure, like on the SR Mag, make sure the hydraulic lines are all in good working order, all the couplers are working properly, and the attachment works as it should be. So I know brooms get used a lot on sidewalks because there's so much zero tolerance that's out there now. So on brooms, you want to check and adjust any the tension on the chain if needed. Oil the chain before the season. It's probably something you should have done in postseason, but make sure you do it again for preseason as well. Adjust and grease the caster wheels. I know I've seen that on some of our SR Mag brooms where people do not grease those caster wheels, and then after sitting all summer, they'll tend to seize up. And then when you go to your first property, you may have a streak of burned off rubber because the caster wheel is not moving. So make sure those are moving freely. And also it's adjusted because as your broom starts to wear down and those bristles get shorter and shorter, you're going to need to adjust your casters to compensate for that. So just make sure everything's adjusted before the season. And then replace any bristles that have worn beyond manufacturer specs. So I forget off the top of my head, Rob may know this at the end, what the specs are on like the SR Mag broom, but just check for that. If it's pretty close to needing to be replaced, just like this is not the most fun thing to do in winter, especially if you're very busy. So if you can complete that before the season, it's going to be to your advantage. So for snowblowers too, you want to check the torque of all fasteners. You want to check the cutting edge for wear. Adjust the skid shoes as needed. That's something that generally gets overlooked. Inspect any hoses for wear and damage. If there's any sort of chains involved with that blower, whether it be on the actual auger itself or the impeller, or if you have that for chute rotation, make sure those chains are properly lubricated to prevent them from breaking during the season. It's also a good idea to apply like a penetrating oil, maybe like a fluid film or something, to the impeller housing, the impeller itself, and the chute. Because a lot of times snow is going through there, you'll see the paint start to wear off. It's not a bad idea to have some oil on there to, one, help that snow move through it easier, but also protect it, because you wore off that layer of paint. So those are kind of things that I would recommend checking. So Rob, anything to add there?
Really big things are recommended maintenance intervals. That's an easy one to do pre-season. Change the engine oil, change hydraulic oil, any fuel filters, air filters. Big one to look at is quick couplers for your hydraulic lines. You'll never be madder at something than when those couplers don't work when it's 0 and half frozen. Just keeping those in good condition and lubricated is a big one. With inspecting tires for wear, a good one on that is a lot of machines now, the parking brake mechanism pushes on the tires and they need to be adjusted out as those tires wear. It may not be, if it's say 1/8 of an inch of wear and you hardly notice it, it's not a big deal. But if you're getting on the end of your usable tire life, it does need to be adjusted out to where it'll hold the machine properly. Biggest one also is, like Adam said, hooking up to different attachments, making sure everything hooks up well. You don't have any pins that are locking up, any quick couplers. Run implements such as brooms or blowers, make sure everything runs smooth. Augers and impellers run, the broom itself runs where you don't get any skips or hiccups in it. Make sure the casters are greased. We see a lot of those, as well as make sure the caps didn't loosen up over transport or as everyone's moving things around and messing with stuff over the summer. We have had guys take their equipment out and say that little pot cap that's over the top of the casters has loosened up, get to maybe the first part of their job halfway through, and all of a sudden their caster is laying in the snow somewhere, missing. Just easy things like that to look for, make sure everything moves free.
Perfect. Okay, so now we're just going to have a quick recap of this presentation today. So again, pre-season maintenance is key to a successful first outing. So I know, a lot of people get very busy, through summer and fall. They're just trying to finish up some jobs that they have on the books, and they may not find the time to do this preseason maintenance, but usually that first storm is stressful enough, especially if you have some new operators that haven't plowed before, have not worked for you before. There's enough other stuff that you need to be worrying about without having to deal with, machines that have gone down from something you could have caught in your preseason checklist. So I know you're busy, but try to make this a priority to get it done before the season actually starts. It's so much easier to handle those issues now than the night before or during a storm. So while preseason maintenance is important, and that was kind of the whole point of this presentation, but maintaining your equipment throughout the entire season is just as important. When it comes to snow equipment, there's a very limited time. Even if you have a winter with over 100 inches of snow, you may feel like you're working all the time, but really in the grand scheme of things, that equipment is not running that often. And if you can, catch something in your preseason inspection and fix it and keep maybe a piece of equipment that is being billed out at $180 an hour, if you can keep that thing moving and working, again, time is money. So this is very important to make sure you can make money in that short window that you actually have. I know, like Rob had mentioned during the box plow portion of this, having an extra set of chain and a ratchet binder with you in the cab, just in case something breaks. It's really important. Just have a quick set of tools with you. I'm not saying you're going to do some, major repair in the middle of a parking lot, but just have basic tools with you. Have an extra quart of plow fluid with you or hydraulic fluid. Have basic parts on hand. Maybe if it's not in the truck, but at least have them at the shop so you can get back up and running quickly and not maybe have to wait until the dealer opens up in the morning. Just some of these basic things. I know you can go to pretty much any dealer, whether you're carrying using a Boss plow or maybe a Fisher plow. Go to your dealer and say, hey, what are the common items I should have with me that I could fix in a parking lot really quickly? And they'll be more than happy to, assemble something for you so you can have a box you can keep behind the seat or maybe just on the shelf at the shop, get you up and running quickly. And then while preseason is really important for maintenance and prep, once the season is over, completing any repairs, following the manufacturer storage guidelines to keep the next preseason tasks to a minimum. I just know there's situations in the snow operations I've been involved in where maybe something got put away that was broken and no one really said anything about it. And by the time the next season rolled around, it might have been a warranty issue, but we are now out of warranty at that point. So it's really important to have your operators communicate anything with you as far as issues, so it can get taken care of before the next season. So again, you're not scrambling to do it. You can make sure even if the parts are maybe a month out, you can easily get them before next season, or that you're still under warranty. So those are all really important points to keep in mind. So Rob, anything to add?
I would just add or reinforce what you said on postseason maintenance. Most of the things you'll see or catch on preseason would have been caught right away on, like, say, your spring breakup, right as you're about to store all your equipment and get ready for your summer season. If you can get everything done, then you have time to work with. It's not, hey, I need to get this out. We're going to get snow in a couple days. We have to get everything ready. It's, hey, if I put this away properly, I can be about 90% sure I can run out, hook this on the truck, just do a quick look over on anything we've talked about today on your preseason inspection, and you're good to go and off in the running. Whereas if you put it away broken, put it away dirty, covered in salt, there's a good chance you're going to pull it out and there's going to be some kind of issue with it.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. So just keep in mind when you are, going through your preseason inspections and repairs and things like that. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to your dealer, and they'll be able to help you out. But one other resource that Boss Snowplow has is our tech service team. So I know if you call in, you won't talk to Rob anymore, but you'll have the group. You'll have Ty, Patrick, Andy, Gordy, or Jamie. A lot of experience in that department, and a lot of times, if you're calling in with an issue, they've probably seen it before. So, so Boss has that resource. Other companies have those resources too, but don't be afraid to just, call that 800 number and reach out and talk to someone that this is all they do for a living. So just keep that in mind. So with that being said, we wish you the best in your 24-25 snow season. I hope it snows a lot and it's very profitable, and yeah, everything goes well for you. So really appreciate your time today, and thanks for being here.
Thanks so much. So much good information there. One quick question is, do you recommend having like a schedule? So many companies, they're not just running, they're not just snow management companies. They're transitioning out of green and into the white. Do you have like a recommendation on setting a schedule, or, backing up to make sure you are ready to do all of these things before the first event hits?
Yeah, when I was involved with a snow operation and I was heading up the entire snow division, kind of what I started to do, I mean, I would start planning as soon as the season was over. But usually what I would try to do, because we kept all of our snow equipment stored off site, I would start to do it in short intervals so our shop wasn't overwhelmed with snow equipment. So usually August 1st, what I would do, I would start pulling in some of the pushers, some of the heavy equipment plows, going through that. Then I would start going through truck plows and then go through our liquid de-icing equipment. But basically I'd have a set schedule. In this week, we want to work on this stuff. If we have to order any parts, fine, we can take care of that. It would just be week by week schedule to make sure that we weren't trying to do everything all at once. And then some of that coordination, especially if you're using, say, skid loaders or something that maybe landscape crews are actually using in the field, coordinating with operations to, maybe get that machine back on like a Friday earlier, or maybe at some point during the week. Maybe if we have to install a beacon light, or do some of that, wire up a hydraulic wing plow, something like that. So it takes a little bit of coordination, but usually for me, like I said, August 1st is when we really started digging through equipment, and then just have that schedule week by week.
Awesome. Great advice. Guys, thank you again so much for being here and sharing this great information with us. Just a few reminders before we hop off. For every live event you attend this week, you'll have a chance to win prizes. Scan the QR code that is on the screen. I think it's on the screen, yep. Or visit simon.org/game and enter code PREP1029 to earn 50 points. All week, you'll want to visit simon.org/bootcamp live for all of our live events, the video recordings in case you missed something from yesterday. This is where you'll also find all of the on-demand resources. Check later today for our video on conducting mock events, the recording from this morning's tech session, and the staking video from yesterday will be up later today as well. Today, we're done for our live event, so join us tomorrow at noon Eastern as we kick off Team Readiness Day with Michael Wagner of Designscapes Colorado, who's presenting a webinar on how to protect your team from external threats. Thanks again to Boss Snowplow for sponsoring Winter Boot